That's like a 30-second delay, as you know.
All right, we'll give it just a second to catch up on everything. But good morning, everybody who's joining us. Let me know when we're good to go, Joe.
Yep, just gonna go to Vimeo, make sure I see it.
I gotta get all the coughs out before we start.
Yeah, but it's definitely live everywhere.
Perfect. All right. So good morning, welcome, and hello, everybody, to AI Game Dev Day. We're going to have a lot of fun today. There's a lot of really interesting talks and a lot of things that I'm excited to learn about. Starting with some, well, I'll get into the schedule in just a few minutes. I just want to make sure that everything is good and everything is working and everybody knows how to get in. So if you've already registered, you should be logged in on the site at gamedevguild.com with your account. And you can just watch the entire stream. And I think you can scrub through that all the way through the entire show to the end. If you're just joining on YouTube, doing a little pre-show, make sure that I still have a voice and to let everybody see the first, I think we're probably going to go all the way up until the lunchtime. So you'll be able to watch all the sessions up until lunchtime on YouTube. And then just during the lunch break, come sign up and join us. It's free. You just go grab your free ticket, log in and join us and come see the rest of the sessions. If you want to join us in the expo hall, that is right here. It looks like it's starting to fill up. A lot of the people with pro passes are coming in. I think we've just left the pro passes on sale because they didn't sell out. Luckily, there's still enough room. So if you wanted to grab one, you can come in and join us. There's a few people in here that gathering around, but I expect this place to be overloaded with people once the sessions actually start. Lots of conversations going on and lots of fun, and maybe have a couple little games and raffles along the way. I know some of the publishers and stuff were talking about giving away some things, so have some fun with that. And then we've got a little room here to hang out and chat with the speakers post session. But if you just want to ask the speakers questions, you don't want to you don't want to come in and run around and chat with everybody, you can always go just through the main site. Just again, register for free, and then you can drop in questions through the Q&A system right in there. So they'll pop up live and get voted up, and the most popular questions are the last. So make sure that if you have any interest in what questions are being asked and all that stuff, that you come join us for that. All right, let me switch back over to my camera view. Oh no, I've lost my camera.
Oh no.
It's because Gather stole my camera.
Oh,
but okay, we'll just leave it on screen sharing mode. Anyway, we're going to kick off the show in about 18 minutes. We'll have our 8 sessions coming up with, let's pull up the session list here. The first one is Seth talking about modular architecture for emergent AI behaviors. This is the one that if everybody who's interested in AI stuff, but not so much the generative stuff, more like NPC AI, it's definitely the one that you want to come to. And also, while you're there, go check out the AI tree booth and go talk to them about AI stuff. It's very similar type stuff. Probably be very interested in that. Following that, we got Etonics with art generation and with Stable Studio. And then Gregory is talking about AI generated music for games, which I'm pretty excited about because music's kind of a pain for me, and being able to just generate it would be great. Corvallis has a session coming up, and it's the anatomy of NPC AI is the actual new name for it. And this one seems really cool. If you haven't seen Corvallis's previous talks, they're really, really engaging and really awesome. You're going to love them. They're some of the top voted ones at the last event, or was one of the top voted talks at the last event because of how good it was. And I expect this one will be just as good or even better because Corvallis is kind of an AI wizard. We got Muhammad after that with AI is my dungeon master, which I think is going to be probably super inspiring for a lot of game developers because they're all into Dungeon Master, especially with Baldur's Gate 3 out now. I'm really, really curious to see what what the actual details of this one are, though. And then we've got a live fireside chat with Mark Whitten about AI. We've got a lot of questions to ask him about what Unity is doing with AI, what the future of Unity is, I guess what Unity's AI future looks like, what they think about the kind of ethics of AI, and how they think it's going to change the industry. Also, hopefully, see what kind of stuff is coming soon that we'll be able to all have access to. I don't know exactly how much they'll reveal there, but I'm pretty excited to find out. And then finally, we've got Chris Lucian, who yesterday on the GameDev show, everybody said this was the talk they were the most excited about. And I think it's largely because Chris is very focused on being super productive and doing things for a reason, not just because they're cool. So all of this stuff is going to be actionable, very useful stuff that you'll probably be able to pull something out of and save a bunch of time from. So that's the session list. Let's see if my camera works now. It does not, but that's okay. We'll be back in about 10 minutes with the live show. So get ready, grab a drink, go do whatever you need to do before we're live, and we'll see you then.
How was that? Yeah, this camera's bad. It's fine again. Yep, it's, well, you can't see it. Yeah, there it is.
right, we're almost ready to get started with the main event. Before we do, I just really quickly wanted to make sure that everybody who's interested in AI goes and signs up for the Centis and Muse beta. There's a link on the page for you right here. You can also just search for Unity AI beta, but just click the link, go sign up, get into the queue so that you can start trying out these systems. So you're going to probably hear a bit about both of these later on today. So if you want to try to get access to them as quickly as possible, now's the time to go sign up. Just use that link, get signed up. Also, a special call out and thanks to Unity for sponsoring this event. It's an amazing sponsor, and we're really happy to have them here talking about not just what's going on with AI, but what they're actually doing with it. They haven't really talked much about AI lately. It's kind of a new topic. So it's going to be a great opportunity to get kind of a first peek, and we're really excited about that. So thanks again to Unity. Everybody make sure you go sign up for the beta if you haven't already. And then we'll see you in just about 5 more minutes. We're going to go live with our first session. right, welcome everybody to the first ever Game Dev or AI Game Dev Day from GameDev Guild. This is an event that I wanted to put on so that we could all learn a lot more about AI and game development and what's going on there. Things are changing relatively quickly and there's a lot to follow, and I've totally lost track of most of it. And I hope to regain kind of my footing here and see what everybody's doing with AI, how it's changing things, and how I can use it to make my development career easier, save me time, and just make better stuff with less work, or maybe just make better stuff and have more fun with it. So today we're going to have 8 full sessions on game development and AI, talking about a wide variety of things, everything from your standard NPC AI that you're probably somewhat familiar with as a game developer to full-on ChatGPT style controlled NPCs, art, music, and everything else in between. It's going to be a lot of fun. Oh, and of course, the code side too. So it should be a lot of fun. I wanted to also thank our sponsor, Unity, who's got Mark Witten here with us today to talk about what Unity is going to be doing with AI in the future and what they're doing now, and a little bit about, I think, what they've been doing in the past that everybody doesn't know about. If you haven't signed up for that Unity AI beta, make sure that you go do that now so that when everybody's talking about it, you'll be able to go in there and try it out and see what it is that they're actually talking about and see how cool it really is and what you can do with it. So let's get started with our first talk. That's going to be Seth, who's talking about modular architecture for emergent AI behaviors. This should be a really fun talk, like I said, about the more standard AI things and a little bit about some of the new things. I haven't seen it yet because I like to be surprised by these and have a lot of fun with them. So let's get ready for this. Make sure that if you have questions, drop them into Slido. If you don't know what that is, then you're probably not logged in and didn't go grab your free ticket. So grab your free ticket, log in, go check out Slido and submit your questions, and we'll take those in the Q&A right after. We'll have plenty of time for lots of questions. Just make sure that you go submit them and vote on them. Oh, and also if you grab a Pro Pass, you can join us and gather afterwards. All right, well, let's get started with this first session from Seth, modular architecture for emergent AI behaviors.
Hey everyone, my name is Seth. Some of you might know me as Tulu from my utility AI tutorial series on YouTube. And my obsession with game AI started a couple years ago when I was simply trying to make an NPC that would just go farm resources and then go drop them off at some storage unit. And I went through all the typical beginner stages of game AI development. I first tried to script my own AI code that ended up turning into spaghetti. I bought a bunch of find a state machine and behavior tree systems off of the asset store without really understanding how they worked. And I kept getting the same result every time. Just, an NPC that looked really stupid and robotic going back and forth between hard-coded positions. So it wasn't really hitting the itch I had, which was to somehow get the NPC to think and act for itself without me having to write code to handle every situation. So if that sounds similar to what you've gone through or what you're currently going through, and you're not sure how to proceed, then this talk will hopefully get you out of that rut. I'm going to show you a modular and extensible architectural approach that can support advanced AI frameworks like utility-based AI systems, planning systems, deep learning models, and any other fancy frameworks you can think of. This won't be a talk about how to build those frameworks, just because that's out of scope for a short 25-minute talk. But it will be about how to design an AI agent, and then how to build a singular modular code base that you can then take those more advanced AI frameworks and plug it into that code base to power your NPCs. It's just one approach that might not suit everyone's needs. But for those of you who want NPCs who can think through and solve problems on their own in the game world, it'll be very helpful to get you started in the right direction. So with that, let's start with the high-level overview of what is required for an intelligent agent in a game. So at the highest level, an intelligent agent needs to be capable of taking some sort of game world data and then performing some sort of logic on that data, and then outputting some sort of optimal action or optimal sequence of actions, which we'll call behavior. That's the most basic operation that an intelligent agent should be capable of doing. Now, let's take this and go one level deeper to flesh this out more. So now we're taking our black box logic module here and splitting it up into 3 different modules. You have the sensor module, the decision maker, and the actuator. And the sensor is responsible for basically detecting the game world data that's sitting in your game scene. It's transforming it into some sort of structured data, and then feeding it into the decision maker, and then the decision maker will run its processing logic on that structured data, and then decide based on that data what the optimal behavior should be. And then we take that optimal behavior and we feed it to the actuator, which is then responsible for executing that behavior and making the agent do what it's supposed to be doing. So at the bare minimum, an intelligent agent needs these 3 different modules. And this approach here is nothing new. It's called an agent-based model. And this has been around since the 1950s, when people first started trying to program AI into computers. So now if we take this agent-based approach and break it down even further, then we actually start seeing a very interesting design pattern arise. So now we've taken the sensor module and broken it up into individual sensors, for example, the visual sensor, the audio sensors, and any other sensors that your agent might require to gather game world data. The decision maker is still a little black box of its own, but we'll talk about that more. If you want to be really fancy, you can actually throw in some sort of memory module here where it actually stores the information that is detected by the sensors. So that the agent has basically a memory of data about the game world. And then these sensors just periodically have to update this memory module, and the decision maker will have access to both the memory and the visual sensors to get data to make decisions. And this is kind of where the idea of blackboards come in. A blackboard is just a particular implementation of what can be called a memory module. It's a general container of knowledge that is updated over time by the sensors, and the agent just has access to that blackboard to make decisions off of. So back to the decision maker. The decision maker takes in the structured data and then outputs an optimal behavior. And then it passes it into the actuator module, which can actually consist of multiple different things, because basically the actuator, as we mentioned before, is just responsible for taking the behavior and making it happen. And that can happen with through a coordination of all these different types of logic that's going on here. At the very least, you're going to probably need some sort of action runner that handles talking with the rest of the logic that sits on your agent. For example, the action runner might based on the optimal behavior it got, it'll reach out to the movement logic and tell to move the agent to the target where the action is supposed to happen. Or if the agent has animations to play, the action runner will play the appropriate animations for the action that's currently running. So the sensor and the actuators sit in between your game world mechanics and the decision maker. They kind of like serve as the interface between the decision maker and your game world mechanics. And your game world mechanics don't change, right? It's once you code it there, the logic there is going to be the same. For example, if there is a method to open a door, that open door method will always run the same logic, and the action runner can access that open door logic method and run it. And that's so the logic to contact the scripts that contain the open door method, that logic is going to be the same every time. Same thing with the visual the sensor modules. These guys are the logic here. If it's looking at something in the game world, the logic to do that lookup of information is going to be the same every time. So the code in your sensors, once you code it and put it in place, and the actuators, once you code it and put it in place, these don't change. What you do have the freedom to change is actually the decision maker. Because you have abstracted the decision maker away from your game world mechanics, it sits here and all it needs to be able to do is to process the structured data and output an optimal behavior. So you can really plug in any decision-making system here. You can plug in a utility AI system here. You could plug in a planning system here. If you want to, you can even train a large language model that takes unstructured data and outputs in a sequence of actions, and you could plug it into this decision maker here. You could train a reinforcement learning agent that takes in this data and then outputs a set of actions, and it could go here. So this agent-based approach provides a very modular and extensible way to code an agent for emergent AI systems, because you have the freedom to just plug whatever you want into this decision maker. So now that I've shown you an abstract way of thinking about the general intelligent agent and its necessary components, let's go ahead and jump into Unity and see an example of this in action. So this is just a very simple village setup that I have created here, where there's a couple different things for these little purple agents to do in the village. Here, this great thing here is the forge, where the agents can come and craft something. They have these mines over here that they can come mine, and there's some trees over here that they can come chop. And then there's a fair area here where the agents can come and chill out at. And so those are a few things that the agents can do. These white little spheres here are critters. They're just little critters in the village, and they're just randomly wandering around. And their purpose is to just kind of scare off the agents. So, and the point of this is to show that the agents, even though it's carrying out an action, or if it already has decided on a behavior, if the agents come close enough, they can sense these little critters and then immediately change their plans or action to react to these critters. And for the simple simulation here, the agent will just immediately start fleeing. They'll just drop the plan or action they're doing, and they'll just flee. So let's take a look at what's actually sitting on the agent here. So you can see here, I have followed the agent-based model that that we were discussing earlier. We have a sensor script, and then we have two different decision makers modules here that we can pick from, and then we have the action runner and the behavior runner. These kind of make up the actuator modules. I decided to split them up into action runner and behavior runner because it was easier to handle sequences of actions with these two running side by side. And we just have a couple different support scripts here. The AI mover, which is responsible for navigating around the nav mesh for the agent, and then the action progress tracker here that's just responsible for tracking the progress of the action if the action runs over a certain amount of time. And then this AI agent script here is just kind of just the script that holds a list of references to all the other important mono behaviors. So we can pass or inject this AI agent script to other things that need access to all the other scripts that are sitting on the agent. So I want to turn the attention to these two decision maker scripts here. One is called random multi-action decision maker, and one is called random single action decision maker. And the point of having a multi-action and a single action is to kind of emulate the different decision maker algorithms out there. So for example, if you're running a planning system, then planning systems typically output a sequence of action, which are multiple actions chained together. And so this random multi-action decision maker, even though it's just randomly chaining actions that it picks from this list, the point of it is that it emulates some sort of planning system that outputs a sequence of actions. Whereas this decision maker here, where it just picks a single action from this list here, it's meant to emulate decision-making algorithms that pick the next action for the agent to do. So, for example, utility-based AI systems. So, if we're going to run a single action decision maker, we'll turn this on and drop it here. If we want to emulate a planning system, then we just grab this here and drop it here. And that's the beauty of this system, is that because, as I mentioned before, because we've abstracted the decision maker logic away from the mechanics of your game world, we can drop in any algorithm in here. So let's actually go ahead and run the simulation really quick to see this stuff in action here. So again, we're starting out with a single action decision maker. And so you can see the single action decision maker picks out the next action and then hands it off to the action runner or the actuator modules, and then the behavior runner and the action runner are both responsible for making that action happen. So he's mining ore right now, and then he's wandering, and then he's going to attend the fair, and this is just going to keep going on and on and on. And let's see if he runs into this little critter here. There you go. You see that he ran into the critter and he got scared, so he immediately changed his action and he fled. There you go, and you can see the other agent here also doing the same thing. And again, like I said, this single action decision maker, it's just randomly picking an action from the list, but it's meant to emulate systems like utility AI systems where it's just picking the next best action and not looking any further than that. So let's go ahead and switch this over to the multi-action decision maker, which is meant to emulate like planning systems. I just come here, turn this off, turn this on, and drop it into the AI agent. And if we press play, we should see a plan get generated. There you go. The agent quickly generated a plan or a sequence of actions, and now it's just proceeding to execute that plan. Okay, let's see if it runs away from the critter. Okay, there you go. You see that he got close to the critter, so he dropped the plan he was going to execute, and he generated a new plan to follow. So let's now jump over to the decision makers. As I mentioned before, we have a multi-action decision maker and a single action decision maker. And the point of these two is not to implement any fancy logic, but rather just to emulate systems that either output a single action or output a sequence of action. So we see that both of these decision maker actually inherit from a parent class, the decision makers. Let's go take a look at the parent class. It's just an abstract class that has a reference to the behavior runner, and then it has an initialization method, and the key method here is the decide behavior. It's an abstract behavior. So any class that inherits from the decision maker just needs to implement the decide behavior. So if we go to the multi-action decision maker, we see that we implemented the decide behavior method here in this way, where our algorithm is randomly generate a plan. And in this method here, then we just randomly piece together a certain number of available actions, and then load that sequence into the behavior runner via this method here, load plan. And the same thing happens in the single action decision maker also. We override this decide behavior here, but now we implement a different logic, different decision-making logic here, where it's just selects a random action from the available list of available actions, and then it loads that single action into the behavior runner. So both of these inherit from decision maker. They implement decide behavior in a slightly different way. So that demonstrates the modularity of this agent-based model approach, where you can, as long as you implement the decide behavior, you can code whatever logic you need to code in here. So if you want to plug in a GOP system in here, you want to plug in a utility AI system in here, you can. It just needs to happen in this decide behavior method here. So now let's jump over to the behavior runner, because that is what actually takes in the action or sequence of actions from the decision maker. If we follow this load plan here, we can see that the plan gets stored, and then the start behavior gets called. And in the start behavior, the action runner is actually just being loaded with a single action. So the behavior runner has a reference to the action runner, and whenever the start behavior method gets called, in this case, it just dequeues a single action into the action runner. So now we can go ahead and trace that to the action runner, and we see that the action runner has a reference to the current action here. And when the behavior runner calls this load action, the action runner just goes ahead and loads the current action, and then it initializes the current action by injecting the agent into it so that the current action has access to all the information it needs to run its logic. Now, if we look up here, the action runner is actually listening to the AI mover here, specifically this event on reach target. So every time the AI mover moves the agent to the target of the action, then it raises this event here, which then causes the action runner to run the start action method. And this is actually what jumpstarts the running of the action. We can see here that the current action, start action is called, injects the agent into it for information, and then it sets this is running bool to true. And then in the update method of the action runner, since the boolean is now true, the current action can now start updating itself. And so this is useful if you're running actions that take time and need to happen over multiple frames. If any logic that is sitting in the update action, then that gets run. So by breaking up the agent into these three different modules, the sensor, the decision maker, and the actuators, we've implemented a very modular and extensible AI system where all you need to do is customize the logic of the decision maker. So you can plug in a GOP system, a utility AI system, a large language model, a reinforcement learning agent model in here, and it will still run the same way because all that this decision maker module does is it takes in data from the sensors and outputs a sequence of action that gets fed into the action runner and the behavior runners. All right, now that we have an agent-based system in place where we can plug into it whatever AI framework we want, let's talk about what framework you should use for your game. This is a very common question I get all the time, and I often see people trying to force their game to use frameworks that just don't work well with the type of game that they're building. So hopefully this will give you some guidance. But first, caveat. This is just a general guide to help you understand what frameworks are available and generally where they're used. More often than not, you're going to find yourself combining bits and pieces of different frameworks together to get the NPC behaviors that you need for your specific game. So look at this diagram as a general guide on what each framework provides in comparison to all the other frameworks. So with that, let's go through them. On the left, we have what I call if-then-else frameworks, and these include decision trees, finite state machines, and behavior trees. Under the hood, they all run very similar logic in terms of picking an action to run. They simply check to see if a set of actions are fulfilled, and if yes, then they just run that particular action. This leads to them being very easy to understand, implement, and gives you tight control over what actions are performed by the NPC. Their downfall, however, is that as your game grows in complexity and you need to add in more actions and behaviors, you end up having a massive intertwined set of conditions to check for, and it just becomes a nightmare to manage. And the reason for naturally having so many conditions to check through is because you basically have to hard code condition checks for every type of situation the NPC will run into. So the more actions you throw in there, the more conditions you will need to check in your web of actions. But these are only problems that you run into if your game is too complex and it has a lot of actions that the NPC needs to be able to do. If your game is small and the AI needs to be simple and predictable, then these if-then-else AI frameworks actually work perfectly fine. You don't need anything more advanced. Okay. Now let's take a look at the center. In the center, we have what is called algorithmic action space exploration frameworks, which include things like utility AI, hierarchical task networks, and GOP. Now, instead of hard coding conditions that check for running every action under every situation, you instead write algorithms that filter through the actions available to the NPC via some sort of scoring or prioritization metric. Whichever action has the most optimal score or priority then gets run. Now, since the algorithm to filter through the actions is the same for every situation, this gives you the freedom to just define all the actions you need to include in your game without having to worry about, having to hard code what exactly the NPC should be doing for this situation and that situation, and that, in this situation, it needs to be doing this specific action. The decision making algorithm handles all of that. So that's why these AI frameworks are much more scalable to handle large, complex games. It can also give rise to unexpected NPC behaviors that end up driving emergent gameplay for the player, which can give the game a lot of replayability value. The drawbacks, however, are that these systems are usually hard to understand, hard to implement, and hard to tune. On top of that, if you run these decision-making algorithms on every NPC, that can become very expensive if you have a lot of NPCs. All right. Now on the right, we move towards what I call learning agents, which is actually really an entire disciplines of their own, and not really, quote unquote, frameworks in the same sense of the previous two categories. Learning agents, whether they be evolutionary algorithms or machine learning agents, basically explore the mechanics of your game world and then develop an understanding of how to operate in the game world. So after enough training in your game world environment, these agents will be able to do literally anything they want, which is pretty darn cool. Instead of having to design and code entire complicated code bases to algorithmically choose actions, we just focus on training these agents in your game world. And the models themselves will then generate behaviors from a black box which contains their internal understanding of the game world. Obviously, this then gives rise to truly unscripted emergent NPC behaviors and is scalable in the sense that you don't have to write all these decision-making algorithms anymore. It's learned into the agent's understanding of the world, and the agent will do the rest. You just need to train these learning agents, and the training becomes the main bottleneck of this approach now. Training learning agents generally take a lot of time, a lot of data, and a lot of computing power. On top of that, the agents can only function in the specific environment of the game that they were trained on. That means that if you make any modifications to your game mechanics after the training for any reason, then the learning agents will most likely have to be retrained again to some degree. But if you can somehow overcome all these limitations, then you'll probably have the most autonomous NPCs for your game. So these are the general categories of AI frameworks that are available for game AI, and you just have to pick and choose which ones best fit for your game. Pick and choose the different parts of each framework and mix and match them so that you achieve the behaviors you want. Okay, so I hope this talk has helped you develop more intuition about how to build code around AI frameworks and which frameworks you should use for your game. There are so many more details involved in the process of implementing game AI. For example, how do you represent and work with world states? How do you coordinate AI with animations and other systems in your game? How do you interrupt an NPC's current behavior? How often should you run the AI decision-making process? And how do you optimize everything? The list is endless. So if you're working on a game and looking for more expertise on this stuff, I just started my GameDev studio, and we focus on making AI-driven games and provide hired consulting on this area of GameDev. So feel free to reach out to me at any of these channels of communications I have listed here, and I would be more than happy to talk game AI with you. I've also listed some great books here that I personally study a lot for game AI, so I highly recommend these books if you're interested in diving deeper into the topic. That's it for me now. Thank you so much for your time, and I will see you on the other side.
Chase, I don't hear you.
I probably was muted. Anyway, thank you. That was awesome. Great session. It was exactly what I was expecting. I like that it dove into this nice separation and shows where you can put in some of these systems. So I've got a couple questions of my own. If you have questions, make sure that you've submitted them in Slido. If you're logged in and registered on the page, you should see that right there. Just drop your questions in or vote up the questions that you like the most. All right, let's bring Seth in and start this question and answer session. All right. Thank you again, Seth. That was definitely very cool. I got to move this so it doesn't look like I'm looking away. There we go. I'm looking at you, but you were over there. So yeah, anyway, that was definitely great. I think that it's probably super informational for people who really don't even know where to begin to think about this AI stuff and how you set up everything from NPCs to game logic and the benefit of separating that stuff out and just thinking about the your sensors and your actuators totally separate from the logic and decision making part and being able to change that out. I think we're going to have quite a few questions about general AI stuff, but again, I just wanted to say thank you again. That was really cool.
Yeah, no problem. It was enjoyable.
Yeah, well, you did a good job putting that whole thing together and then bringing it, I think, going from a small concept and then expanding it out and then actually diving into the code and showing how it works, which is exactly the kind of sessions and talks that I love to see. So let's get started. Let's just bring up the first question. We're going to end up with quite a few of them, I think. That is not the first. That's a whole bunch of questions. Where's the what? There we go. Perfect. So is the Unity project source for this demo available for download? They wanted to see the source code and implementation. Is that something that you make available on your page, or how would they get a hold of that if you do?
Yeah. So I listed my GitHub on the last slide of the talk, and that's where you can access the demo. It's publicly available. You can go there, dig into the code all you want. And yeah, so definitely go and check it out.
We'll make sure that's available in the links and resources too, so you can grab it. But what's your main website for everybody to just go take a look at too? Because I'm sure that's going to have all the links. You want to just tell everybody the name of that?
Yes, so that's tulustudio.com. I'm still working on it. It's not fully off yet. It has like a few of my social sites linked into it, but yeah, it's a work in progress. But the GitHub link was available there. I showed on the contact light, so if you provide it to everyone, they should be able to access the source code.
Perfect. I think that'll be a really good learning resource for people to be able to actually dive in and see how it's all implemented and re-implement it themselves and get a lot of information there. So the next question came from Anonymous. I don't know why people don't have their names, and put your name in if you're asking a question. Do you think that there's a chance that these AI tools become the default way to do things? Do they actually save that much time? And here, I mean, with this session, I'm curious your thoughts on AI tools in general in games, but also on the new AI stuff too, because I'm sure everybody's kind of curious, like your thoughts on are LLMs or whatever going to just take over all these other ones, and is that going to be the way to go in the future because it's just easier and faster and better? Or where are you at on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think that will the tools become the default way of doing things? I think that it's going to be like the way it's always been. There's going to be tools available, and you just have to be aware of where these tools are and take time to learn them. So there are established methods on building AI agents already out there, but unfortunately, the information is just not very well dispersed to the indie community, especially because everyone's just kind of like scrambling for information, and there's no centralized place. But yeah, as technologies as all this AI technology gets released, they will be there. You just have to kind of look for them and take your time to learn them in order to implement them. For example, the books I showed, like they've been available for years, and I think people just aren't aware of them. But if you actually go through them and read them, they teach you like very structured ways on how to build AI agents, and it's going to be the same for large language models and reinforcement learning agents as we move into this machine learning age of AI. So that's my thoughts on it.
Nice. And of those books, I'm curious myself, which one would you recommend for people to start with? Like if somebody's interested, curious about AI stuff and you want to get into it, like what's the beginner book that you point them to?
Yeah, I think the first book I listed, the AI for games, that one was a really good intro to it. It starts you from like the basics of movement and how to code the pseudocode for movement, and it takes you all the way to like procedural machine learning and procedural content generation. So it covers a lot of topics, and it teaches you all the code to do it. You just need to translate that to either Unity or whatever game engine that you need to implement. That's a really good place for a solid foundation. The second one would be the Game AI Pro books. They're freely available online. The PDFs are all available online, and they give you a lot of like insight onto what has been done before and like pitfalls to look out for. So I think those two resources are really good to start with.
That's a great set of them. I'm going to have to check out the first one. I've seen the second, but not the first. I need to go grab that and add it to my list of things to read when I'm flying. All right, let's pull up the next question we've got. It says, I have seen designer-friendly tools for state machines and behavior trees, but not utility AI or GoApp or Goal. I can never get this right. Oh, can you remind me of the acronym? I'll say at least one of these words wrong. Can you speak to designer-friendly ways to tune those types of frameworks? And you just tell everybody what those two are as well.
Yeah. So for if you don't know, utility AI is kind of like just a fancy AI system to score actions, and it gives you a way the agent to decide like what's the next best action. So there's no look into the future to see like what will solve my problems. It's just what is the thing that will best suit my current needs right now. Whereas goal-oriented action planning takes a kind of different perspective where it says, okay, what are the sequences of actions that I can do so that I can meet a certain goal at the end? And then it chains together all the actions that will lead it to its final goal state. And yeah, like the question pointed out, there's not a whole lot of tools for utility AI and GOAP, unfortunately, out there. And one of the reasons why they're not very popular is because they're very hard to tune. Can you speak to a designer-friendly way to tune these frameworks? I think that really it's a really hard thing to design, just because there's so many parameters that you can tweak with these things. But you would really have to dive into the developer, at least, would really have to dive into like, for utility AI, it would be the scoring for the consideration. So they would have, it's all about UI really. So if the developer can develop a UI that kind of makes sense for the designers, then that would be a good tool. But there's just not that much available for that stuff. So you just really need to dig into the specific parameters of each framework and then play with them. And it takes specialized knowledge to really do that. So unfortunately, if the developers don't work on it, then the designers don't have a tool for it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I found that, like, in my experience, at least the utility AI was good with really small projects where there wasn't a lot of complicated AI. But boy, once things got a little bit more complex, it got very difficult to be like, well, what does it actually do in this scenario? I'm curious, what scenarios do you find that like a utility AI or the Go app are good options? Like, where there are like specific games or AI scenarios in games where you think that those are kind of like the best or default go-to, or maybe some just good examples of where they would fit really well?
Yeah, so my general guide is that for utility AI, it's really good for fast-paced and instantaneous decision making. So you don't think about, the agent doesn't need to think about like, what are the effects of my actions? It just thinks about, what am I going to do to survive at this instant? So, first-person shooters, fighter games, right, that need to just pick the next best action to maximize its amount of damage or maximize its amount of healing or something like that. That's a really good application of utility AI. For GOAP, obviously the GOAP is all about planning, so it's looking long term. So GOAP is really good for simulation games where the agent needs to plan out the step to optimize its goal. So typically simulation games, I would fall back on GOAP. For fast-paced games, I use utility AI.
Nice. I think that's a good overview.
Yeah, and there's no hard rule saying that you can't use GOAP for fast-paced game. In the fear games, they used GOAP for a first-person shooter, and it was perfectly fine. The problem was that the plans that the agents generated were literally only like one or two actions, so it almost wasn't like worth it to do all that computation in the back end. just to figure out like, oh, I should do this 1 or 2 steps of actions. So it can work
Right.
for fast-paced games, it's just not recommended.
I wonder how much of that was just a change in plan too, like a scope, a bigger idea initially of what the AI was going to do, and then realizing that something else was a little bit more fun.
Right.
All right, can we pop up the next question? We've got a bunch of them keep coming in now. Which use of generative networks might be predicted to have larger impact on game development? Generated dialogue or generated assets? Do you have a thought or opinion on this? I expect most people here today are going to have some thoughts on this. Do you think it's going to be dialogue, assets, or do you think it's just going to be like code? Maybe it's none of those.
Oh man, I mean, each of them touch a different aspect of game development. So it's, for art assets, right? Obviously, generative AI art is going to be a big impact. So it's it's almost like you really can't compare oranges to apples here because for the dialogue section, that's like a totally area of game development. That's really different from like the aesthetics of the game. So I feel like you really can't compare them. Each aspect of game development will be largely impacted by their own generative AI tool sets. For me, I focus more on like behavior generation, and I guess I'm a little bit. If you want, like, if I'm forced to give it like pick one, like then I would say behavior generation is going to be really really big in game development because when people play games, they want to have realistic NPCs that can generate realistic behaviors, and people are the most popular games out there are the ones where people are able to see their NPCs like act on their own, and they're like just are so fascinated by that. And to me, behavioral generative AI is going to be a really big thing. We're not quite there yet. I think Unity has stuff in the works and secrets. I'm positive that at least in the next few years, we're definitely going to see behavioral generative AI come out, and it's going to be a really big impact on game development. So if I had to choose one, that would be my my pick.
I think you're probably right. The two choices that they presented, I'm going to say that art is probably going to get hit the most because I don't think that people will feel comfortable enough to replace dialogue writers just yet, but they'll feel more than comfortable to replace artists. I feel like with art, it's easy to be a little bit more objective of is this good enough? If it's writing stuff, then you're like, unless you're a writer or really into it, it gets a lot harder to judge. So like it'll probably get hit a lot less. Plus, it's just a much smaller part of the industry. Art is a giant piece. All right, we've got lots of questions. Let's go on to the next one from Corvallis. Is your studio currently working on any AI-powered games you plan to release?
Yes.
And if not, what is your studio working on? It is? Oh, yeah.
So right now I am working on a game. It's my dream game. Every indie developer goes into game development hoping to make their dream game, and it is going to be a heavily AI powered game, based on one of the games that really inspired me, which was Kenshi. I don't know if people know about it, but Kenshi is like a sandbox open world game and that really inspired me to dive into this field. And it's just NPCs living in the world doing their own things, and you're dropped into it and you just explore the world, and you just see like wars happening, fights happening, and that really inspired me to make my own spin in it, because the AI was a little bit limited in that game, and I wanted to make it more versatile and just have more emergence in the gameplay. So I am working on a game. It's still under wraps right now. I'm hoping to get like a full demo going by a finished demo by like the end of spring next year, and then hopefully get the pitch to some ushers by next summer. That's the goal, but we'll see how it goes.
Nice. So we'll have to talk about and share that as soon as it's ready. Whenever you're ready to announce it and get past the secretive stage and you're out there, I think that would be awesome. People probably really love to see that. Yeah. All right, let's go into one more question. I think we got time for a couple more here. If you somehow make it possible to dynamically change the world in the game, is it possible to make sure that AI continues to learn in real time on the client, or is it a dangerous option due to unpredictability? So here I think they're kind of asking about, you've got a game where you're giving it this generative AI, behavior stuff, and probably thinking similar to some of the systems out there now, where you can give the character somewhat of a backstory and some info, and they're wondering if the state of that world is constantly changing, is that kind of system going to work? And I guess, where are we with that kind of stuff, and how do you feel about like the current state of it? I know you said it's not really quite there yet for
Right.
stuff, but I mean, are there some issues or things that you would point out there, like around state changes and other stuff?
Yeah, it's a very fascinating question, and quite frankly, I don't know the answer to that because it's such a brand new area of research. Even now, I'm an AI research scientist, and we build like reinforcement learning agents to try to just learn environments, and it's already hard enough to train them on a static environment. So to have like a dynamically changing environment, I think that's still an untapped technology that we're still building towards. I definitely think it's doable, but the technology is just not quite there yet. There may be some ways you can do it in a pseudo way to achieve this, but it wouldn't be truly the agent like learning as the environment changes. It would probably be a lot of backend code to support mimic as the agent as if it's learning. So the technology is not quite there yet, based on what I know as a researcher.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think it kind of backs up to what their question was kind of leading towards. That they thought it might not be quite there yet, which I guess makes sense. But things are going so fast, I expect stuff to change quick. All right, let's pop up the next question, which was regarding decision maker. Which model is best if the NPC has conflicting goals with priority, but we don't want it to always do the highest priority thing it can do? If solving this is something that fits in that is solving this something that fits in the if then else model, or is that not good? So it's say they want to have like a chance to do things. They've got these priorities, but then they want to do a chance. So they just use the same the same system and then add like a chance on each one of those options, or how do you go about that, or do you switch to a different
so this is a common question I encounter a lot when people are trying to decide what framework to use. When it comes to deciding between the optimal goal, like the best scoring goal or action, versus like some suboptimal, that really comes down to custom code you build around the framework. So you could use any of these frameworks. You just have to build the custom code to kind of give that random chance to be like, okay, don't always pick the most optimal goal. Maybe there's like 25% chance to pick a suboptimal goal. And that's kind of like custom code you build around these frameworks. These frameworks are just like to guide you on how to design and build decision making process. But 100% of the time, you're going to need custom code to achieve some of those things like picking a suboptimal goal versus the optimal goal. So you can use any framework. You just have to implement the custom code to allow the agent to pick a suboptimal goal.
Yeah, I feel like you've got to do a little bit of customization on all of them for your game, depending on what it is. And people, it's important to point that out, because people will think that, hey, I've got this framework and now I have to use it exactly the way that I got it or copied it or coded it or whatever. Or just the features that came in this.
Yeah, when I started, I fell into the same pitfall too. It was like, I thought that if I buy an asset from the store, it would solve all my problems. But no, I learned over time that I have to build a lot around it to make it do the thing that I
want. Still got to do a little bit of work, right? It's not quite to the point where the AI just does it all for us. I still feel like, at least hopefully by the time I have grandkids, that it's like that. And it's just a holodeck that I can just walk up to. Like, I don't want to code, just make me a game, and it does whatever I tell it. Yeah. That's my long-term. All right, we got time for, I think, 2 or 3 more questions. You want to pop another one up? So my game Zoffer is a turn-based deterministic strategy game, like chess, checkers, or tic-tac-toe, with a strong algorithmic AI using min-max, etc. Can machine learning be used for such a game? Do you want to really, if you can, explain what that? Maybe explain a little bit about what this question means with the strong algorithmic AI. So anybody that got lost there can understand the answer.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. A lot of these games, chess, checkers, tic-tac-toes, like these board games, they follow very strict rules. Like very not strict, but very a static set of rules, and that's perfect actually for machine learning. A lot of machine learning models out there play these rule-based game very well because the rules don't change. So yes, if your game is anything that has a set of static rules that don't change, machine learning algorithms, if you train an agent on it, it will be able to play better and better and better over time to the point where it's even better than a human being. So the answer is yes.
Perfect. I'm excited to see what kind of stuff can be trained with like ML agent type stuff. I played with ML agents back in the day when it first got announced and did a bunch of experimenting with it, but I never ran into a project that I had where like I actually had a good use for it. So it was all like kind of experiments. But now I'm kind of getting into that mindset of this stuff is growing. I want to come up with something cool that actually makes sense to use it. Not just use it just to use it, but makes sense because it's going to make a big difference and make the thing interesting and fun. So I'm constantly looking for those opportunities now.
Yeah.
I guess a deterministic game would make a lot of sense. All right, let's do one or two more questions. We've got Jeff's question. Did you use Unity's included AI stuff to create the solution, or was it all you? What did you use for all of these different AI decision-making systems that you have in there?
So that was just all me. The only AI that I actually used was the nav mesh, that was just to move agents around. But you can do movement without nav mesh. It was just one approach for movement. But everything else, the decision maker logic, all the actuators and all that was custom code that I built, and I use for my own games too. So and it's available on the GitHub. So go ahead and take a look at it. It's like a bit watered down version of what I actually implement, but for the sake of the demo and for the talk, I try to make it so that it's you can open it without rolling your eyes to the back of your head due to the complexity. So hopefully, if you guys look into it, dig into it, it's simple enough and straightforward to understand that, so that you get the idea of how to architecture the code. But yeah, so definitely take a look at it. All custom.
Nice.
code.
And everybody that didn't see earlier, you can get that at github.com. I think it was /Tulu Studio, and go to tulustudio.com to see all of the other links and check it out. We'll also make sure that that's up on the page so that everybody can access it afterwards. We'll put it up on the free page. And for everybody who is curious about the recordings, they're available with the Pro Pass. It's relatively cheap, just covers the cost of editing these. So you're welcome to grab those. Let's do one more question, and then we're going to cut to a break. Got this last question here.
I got rid of the other one, Jason, about the recordings, but...
Oh, okay. I'll pass that one. How good is the Unity AI companion? How commonly is beta access provided to users? Now, can you tell everybody what that is, if you know about the Unity AI companion stuff, and what you know about the Unity beta stuff?
I actually don't know what Unity AI companion is. So
okay,
I must be missing something.
I'm not sure what it is either. The beta access, though, I don't know how much. I know that they're putting people in small batches, but I don't know the size of that, or if they've talked about that. That might be something that Mark's able to get into later. I guess we'll find out when we get questions in the Q&A time there. All right, so I think the recorded video is available for the Pro Pass people, and we were gonna, I guess, thanks Seth very much for this awesome talk. I don't know if you're going to be around in the expo hall afterwards. There's probably a bunch of people that might want
a few hours. Yeah,
sweet. Yeah, so if you got follow-up questions you wanted to ask Seth, or just go show him your awesome AI thing, just jump in there, go say hello, drop by and say thank you, especially for this awesome session. It was very helpful. Thanks again. And one more time, the book that you recommended, what was the name of that one?
AI for Games.
AI for Games.
AI
okay.
for Games.
We're going to get all these links up here, but I just want to make sure everybody's in the mood and starting to read.
Yeah. So I'm teaching a university course off of that book. So it's definitely a really good book to go for everything.
Awesome. Well, everybody make sure to go check out all of Seth's stuff. Go check out his site, subscribe to all of his different channels, and go learn more about AI for NPCs and just general behavior. It's very interesting and lots of fun. All right, we'll see you all in just a few minutes with our next session, which is going to be Etonics talking about art generation with Stable Studios. If you've been looking into generating art for your games, it's something I've been doing constantly. I mainly use Midjourney though, so I'm really curious to see what the alternative options are. All right, we'll be back in just a minute with that. See you soon. All right, welcome back, everybody, to hour 2 of AI Game Dev Day. We've got Etonics up next, talking about art generation with Stable Studio, which I think is going to be really exciting because all I really know how to use well is Midjourney, and I think that this is something that I've been wanting to learn about and get better with because it's free, from what I understand. Free tools for generating art and doing it in much more controlled and advanced ways than what I think I've been doing myself. So I'm really excited to check this out and then drop by the Etonics or the Shattered Soul Studios Expo Hall booth later on. So if after the event, or after the session, make sure you drop in your questions for the Q&A and then come by the Expo Hall if you have a Pro Pass and say hi to them and ask all your follow-up questions. All right, let's get started with this session on art generation with Stable Studio.
Hi, I'm Etonic Spyro, founder of Shadowed Soul Studios. We create assets for the Unity game engine and provide freelance development and design services for all manner of things. Personally, I've been an avid lover of games since I was a young child, especially those of the video variety. Chip's Challenge had me instantly hooked, and Super Mario Bros. Kept me up so many nights. To say I was addicted was a bit of an understatement. Back in 2007, I went from playing on to working on an existing live service game called Moral Decay LP Mud, a relic from 1992. In 2017, I was the lead active administrator for the service, and I've been keeping it alive, and I've even managed to regrow some of the player base since then. But after a couple of years of that, I decided that it was time for more and ventured out into Unity, where I've been learning daily ever since. But enough about me. Let's move on to the topic of the day, AI. And no, not the kind that chases you through Elwyn Forest when you've stolen their candle. The kind that will one day be our cybernetic overlords. Within the past year, we've seen a bit of an explosion in the artificial intelligence sphere. Large language models have taken the spotlight and are fastidiously interweaving themselves into everyday life, answering questions, assisting with creative writing, software development, funding lawyers' yachts. I could continue, but I wouldn't reach the end of the list before this video ends. Before we go further, I would like to add that I am not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice. There are plenty of open lawsuits against OpenAI, Stability AI, and a handful of others challenging whether or not they had legal permissions to train their models on the data sets that they trained them on. And with the United States Supreme Court recently ruling that AI-generated artwork cannot be copywritten, it still leaves a handful of questions yet to be answered. One of the biggest that comes to mind being how much alteration do I have to put into an AI-generated artwork before it's no longer considered generated by an AI and therefore available to be copywritten? Thankfully, we can kind of skirt around some of these questions for now by training our own models on data we already own and have full rights to. Unfortunately, AMD graphics cards cannot currently train models, so I will not be showcasing that in this video. AMD is working on it with their Radeon Open Compute platform, but it's not quite there yet. So, without further delay, today I'm going to show you how easy it is to generate AI art on your own computer. Let's begin. However, before we can begin generating our images, we need to ensure that we have some software installed, namely Python 3.10.6, Node JavaScript engine for the Node Package Manager and Yarn, and Git. However, considering we're at a game developers conference, I'm going to assume we have that already. Now, when we're installing Python and Node, we want to ensure that both executables are added to the path for the environment. This means that no matter where we are in the command prompt, we can access them without having to give a direct file reference. And as I move along through this installation process, you can see me checking them and ensuring that they're enabled, just to be safe. And don't worry, I'll provide slides with links at the end of this video so that you can get the versions you need. Now, once we're done installing Node, Git, and Python, we want to open up a command prompt window and navigate to a folder that we won't get lost trying to find. From there, we're going to download 2 Git repositories from GitHub. The first one is AMD specific, but it is the Stable Diffusion Web UI by Automatic 1111. I will provide the NVIDIA specific repo at the end of this video. In addition, we're going to download Stability AI's recently released Stable Studio package. Now, this adds a different web UI that runs separately from the Automatic 1111 web UI, and I think it just looks a bit cleaner and it's a little bit more user-friendly if you don't want to delve into all of the options and details. But I'll show you a bit of that later too. Don't worry. Next, we're going to enter the Stable Diffusion Web UI DirectML folder. From there, we're going to both initialize and update any Git submodules that may need updating. A Git submodule is just another repository within a repository. From there, we're going to copy the webui user.bat file to a new file called stablestudio.bat. Then we're going to open stablestudio.bat in Notepad so that we can add some command line arguments. Now, NVIDIA users only have to pay attention to 2 of these, but in my case, because AMD is late to the party, I have to add a few more to get it to behave in a manner that will actually produce images and not just black squares. However, the main 2 that you need to pay attention to if you're an NVIDIA user are the Core's Allow Origins flag, which lets Stable Studio actually communicate with the API, and the No Web UI flag, which disables the Automatic 1111 Stable Diffusion Web UI, which is default, and just enables the API. Next, we're going to open up stablestudio.bat and let it run because it's going to take a while.
Several days later.
Now, while that installs, we're going to head over to huggingface.co and download a text-to-image model, specifically Stable Diffusion 2.1 from Stability AI. And this is going to give us a bit of information about the model itself, whatever the creator decided to list, contributions, etc. But we're going to head to the Files and Downloads tab and select the v-2-1_768-ema-pruned.safe tensors link. It is smaller and it is what we want. That'll take us to the next page, informing us that it's a large file, but we can still download it. So we'll select that link and save it to our Stable Diffusion Web UI DirectML folder under Models and then under Stable Diffusion. We're going to let that download. Then in the meantime, we're going to head over to Civitai. Now, this site is a bit iffy. It provides a lot of image generation models and utilities. As you can see here, it's got characters and styles and celebrities, concepts, a plethora of different classifications. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this has safe mode enabled. There's way more to this website, but that's not safe for work, and that's where we are. So we're going to keep it PG-13. Now, you do have to keep in mind that these are all trained by some other person. You cannot verify the authenticity of the data, whether or not they had the appropriate permissions to train these models, or anything of the sorts. But we're going to check out this itty bitty cat model because it is just adorable. We're going to make sure that it's a checkpoint, therefore a model, and that it's a safe tensor file. From there, we can download it into the same folder as the last model that we downloaded from huggingface.co, and just let that download as well. Remember, these files may take a while to download. They're rather large.
The next day.
Once everything is done downloading, the server will finish initializing in an API-only mode, facilitating communication with Stable Studio. Our next step is to open up a new command prompt window in administrator mode. We want to then navigate to the repositories that we downloaded earlier and enter the Stable Studio repository. We're going to enable Core Pack, and then we're going to activate the latest stable version of the Yarn package manager. From there, we're going to invoke Yarn, and it's going to proceed to download and activate any of the required services and additional packages that Stable Studio requires in order to generate images with the Stable Diffusion Web UI. Once that's done, it may take a while, we're going to enter in another command, and this command is just going to enable and activate the Stable Studio package with a specific plugin to communicate with the Stable Diffusion Web UI. Just a little bit of a bridge or an interface, if you would. And all that's left once that's done is to open up our browsers to the link it shows us. When that link has loaded, we're greeted with a clean but pared down version of the Stable Diffusion Web UI. It gives us a randomly generated prompt to work with, but we can click this Shuffle Prompt button until we find one that we actually like. Now, since I'm on an AMD card, I'm going to cut down the images generated to 1 for the sake of this video. In addition, I'm also going to be using the SD version 1.5 model that was installed when we downloaded and installed Stable Diffusion Web UI. We'll hit Dream, and with the help of some video editing, we're going to skip along to the good parts. Now we can see that the image generation has finished and followed the prompt pretty closely to the letter. It is a hypnotic vortex of swirling colors that is most definitely intense and abstract. But before we go much further, I'd like to try out the itty bitty kitty cat model. Simply because I just found it while researching this video, and I'd like to see what it can do. It didn't look too robust, so maybe this prompt won't work, maybe it will. We're going to roll the die. Let's try an itty bitty kitty cat in a field of flowers. Now we're going to hit the Dream button and see what we can do. Now, as you see there, it disappeared as soon as I hit Dream. Instead of the model changing when we used the drop-down, it used that first push of the Dream button to send the command to the API to change the model. After we hit it a second time, it should have the model loaded and start generating the image for us. And with the help of some more video magic, we're going to skip ahead to the good parts and get our itty bitty kitty cat. Now our itty bitty kitty cat has been born, and unfortunately it was in a field of fingers and not a field of flowers. But as we said, it was a roll of the die. So let's move on to our next topic here, the Stable Diffusion Web UI without Stable Studio. As you see here, I've got a new command prompt window open, and I've already navigated to the Stable Diffusion Web UI DirectML folder. Now we're going to edit the web UI user.bat file in order to paste in the command line arguments that allow it to run on an AMD graphics card, but we're going to omit the ones that force it into an API-only mode. We'll then save and go back to the command prompt in order to run the web UI user.bat file and start up the server. This is going to force it into a server-facing mode instead of an API-only mode so that we can access it from our web browser. And thankfully, in modern versions of Windows, that's as simple as holding Control and clicking on a link. Once you do that, it'll open that link up in a brand new web browser window, ready to go and execute whatever task you have at hand. Now, as you can see here, we've got a different beast entirely from Stable Studio. If you look in the top left, that's where your models are. And if you try to click one, it'll try and load it instantaneously. A stark difference. But for now, I've got something to show you. So we'll move over to the Extensions tab and click on Available so that we can select from the available packages that work with the Stable Diffusion Web UI by default. This is updated from time to time, so you might want to keep an eye on it if you choose to go this route. From here, we're going to search for the Civitai package, just by entering Civitai. And we'll select this one here. I believe this is the one we want, and we'll hit Install. And what that's going to do is download and install that package and set it up so that we can use it. But before we do that, we have to go back over to the Installed tab, not the Settings, and click on Apply and Restart UI. This is going to force refresh the server and the browser to enable any new extensions. Let's select the Civitai Helper tab and scroll through most of these options that we won't use. They let us query model information, check for updates, and even download a new model simply by providing the URL, which I'm going to do here just to show you. Now I enter in the URL and I click the big orange button that says Get Model Info by Civitai URL. This queries the server and gets some basic information about the model. From here, it's up to us to select which folder it goes into and the model version we want before initializing the download. This one is something kind of special. As you can see here, it's called NVJob AIM. And if the word NVJob stands out, it should. He's a fellow Unity asset publisher. And while I can't vouch for the authenticity or the provenance of this data set, or whether or not he was actually able to attain the rights to train these or created them himself, they're pretty cool, and I'd be remiss to say if I didn't want to use them myself. Fortunately, there's a little bit of text here that says game developers can use this model to create their own custom crosshairs in their game development. So we're going to check on this, and unfortunately, it's still going. So we're going to move over to yet another package by the same author. This one is called NVJob Magic Circle, and as you might guess, it's perfect for generating summoning circles, casting circles, pentagrams, you name it. It looks cool, it's for magic-y stuff, and again, the same conditions apply. I can't verify it, we don't know, but he says game developers can use it, so we'll download that one next. As you can see, this one is done downloading, and since it's not too far off from the other, I'm just going to adjust it and get the proper URL in here before pulling the data again and downloading the next model. Again, this is the NVJob Magic Circle model. So when that's done processing, we'll be able to start generating. And as you can see, this one was rather quick. So we'll go back up here to the Text to Image tab, and right beside our models, we'll click this little blue square which refreshes our models. And from there, we'll select the NVJob AIM model. Next, we're going to give it a nice prompt, beginning with the token NVJob AIM, because in all of the author's examples, the first token in every prompt was NVJob AIM. We'll follow that up with square crosshair, detailed, and white background, before selecting a fast sampling method and ensuring that the rest of the variables are configured properly in order to coax the image we want out of this AI. Next, we'll click Generate and we'll wait for the results to appear. Now, depending on your graphics card or computer, this could take quite a while, but you will get progress images. One should be appearing before too much longer. And this isn't going to be anywhere near the final image. This is just the first step of many. So we're going to use some more video editing magic and skip along to the good part. Now that our image is done generating, we can see that while unfortunately it isn't squared, it is a very cool crosshair and it is on a white background. We're going to chalk this up as a win because I couldn't have made this, and we're going to move right along into the next section, a shameless plug for Shadowbox Stability, my latest asset. I created this asset to interface the Unity editor directly with the automatic 1111 Stable Diffusion web UI. This allows me to generate all of these images via the API directly within the Unity editor. So let's move on to the slides and Q&A. Thank you for watching.
All right, that was great. The ending was perfect because it answered a question that I was just about to ask. So we've got a couple questions coming in. If you have a question for Etonics about this AI image generation, or even that last little bit right there, drop it in right now, and we'll try to take as many of them as we can before we run out of time. All right, let's pop up the first. Well, actually, let's bring Etonics out here first. What are we doing? Got to bring them out here. All right. Hello and welcome. I wasn't sure if I was going to see a person or a character today. How are you doing? That was great.
Yeah,
Thank you very much for that
I
talk.
my mind myself. So, thank you. It's going pretty well. How are you today?
Oh, this is good. I'm learning a lot, and I expect to learn a whole lot more throughout the rest of the day and have quite a few things to use. Now, before we get into the official questions, I was just like during your session, the whole time I was thinking like, why doesn't somebody make a tool to make this easy? So you just kind of plug it in and just type in it. It just appears. Why is this not just like a paid thing that you just go buy once and you can do this all easily? And then right at the end, you revealed that you actually made one, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I was looking for. So can you talk just a little bit about what drove you to make that before we dive into these questions? Like, what was the kind of catalyst that made you build the tool? And it talk a little bit more about how it works.
Yeah, sure. Honestly, I built a little progress bar in the inspector, and I realized that I needed something that had a progress report for it. So I figured, why not stability? You know, why not use stable diffusion? Because I'm already generating images while I'm coding this. So let's test it out. And fortunately, it came together pretty well.
Nice. And then what made you turn that into like a whole tool that you're selling on the asset store, though?
Honestly, I have no idea. I just felt that it was good to share.
Yeah, it is. No, you probably just had the same thought that I did, that most people would probably prefer a very easy to use way to do this, where it's just kind of integrated. So that's great.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, the one thing I am seeing on the asset store is a lot of stuff for like OpenAI and Bard, whatever. I don't see anything for stable diffusion. Well, I didn't.
Yeah, now you do, right? All right, let's start with our first question from, I think it was Rooney. Or is it Greg's? Who's popping up first? Rooney's coming up. Does Stable Studio offer any unique features over automatic with 4 ones? I'm not sure how you say that. And that would make up for the lack of extensions. There are hundreds of extensions for the automatic one. Do you know what this automatic 1111 is?
Yeah, that's actually the Stable Diffusion web UI by default. That was the first package we installed in the video. Honestly,
okay.
there
I
aren't
missed
really
the name there.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful. Honestly, there aren't really many benefits other than it being user friendly. The extensions, for the most part, are available solely within Stable Diffusion, but you can call a few of them from Stable Studio itself. Now, the problem you do get into is when you're trying to use LoRa's, which um, they're just smaller models that have basically been trained to do a specific generation task. And there are a plethora of them, for poses, which we have ControlNet now, but for LoRa's, you actually have to edit a little bit of the Python script to get them to work in Stable Diffusion or Stable Studio.
Oh, okay. That sounds slightly more advanced for people getting into it, but still probably useful to know about. Let's go on to this next question. This was a video card one, and right at the beginning, you mentioned that you were there's a kind of a big difference between AMD and NVIDIA cards, and I'm wondering. I want to read the question, but I'm wondering if there's more of a difference than just the brand and its specific cards and other things like that. So Greg was asking what video card you're using, how much VRAM does it have, and how long does it actually take to generate? Since you were kind of fast forwarding past those, is that just a couple seconds and it's just kind of slower? Or is it 3 hours and you're waiting for an image, or where is it? And then after that, can you talk a little bit about like what the recommended video cards are? Like, what's kind of like bottom spec for good, and where does it go from there? Is it like a specific NVIDIA card, or any old? I grab my 10-year-old NVIDIA card and it's still good, or what's the situation there?
Well, let me start by saying I honestly don't know how low it can go. They have got this running on Raspberry Pi.
Okay.
But to answer Greg's question, I'm running on an XFX AMD Radeon 6600, and it's got about 8 gigs of VRAM. So it takes between 2 to 4 minutes, depending on the parameters that I enter in the command line arguments to generate an image.
Okay. And if you were on like a newer NVIDIA card, are you expecting that's going to be more like a couple seconds or instant, or what's the difference there?
Well, according to my artists, since they use NVIDIA cards, it tends to take about 40 seconds.
Oh, okay. So it's faster, but it's
for a
not
decent image.
orders of magnitude
It's not
faster or
incredibly
anything.
faster. Right.
Okay. Okay. Just making sure everybody knows, so they don't need to have an NVIDIA card to make it useful. It's just a nice little
not
benefit,
at all.
I
You
guess.
don't even actually need a graphics card. It can run off of CPU inference, but that would probably take a lot longer.
Yeah, I can imagine it would take a bit to generate on one of those Pis. Sitting there generating, watching the little cassettes melt.
Definitely.
All right, let's go on to the next question here, which was from Mark Andre, who asked if there's any software like this that can handle 3D art. Have you seen anything like that that's doing 3D stuff? And if so, where is it in comparison? I've seen a couple things that are working on that, but I don't think that they're at the same level yet. I'm curious what you've seen.
I haven't really seen too much recently. I've seen a lot where they generate a bunch of different angles from a 2D object and then kind of try to piece that together into a mesh. But recently, within the past week, NVIDIA released an announcement about a model that they've been working on that creates some fairly decent looking low poly models for 3D. And I don't think they've released anything more about that. Once we're done with the Q&A, I'll fish up some links and throw them in the GameDev Guild Discord.
Nice. That would be very helpful. I think people will love to see that. I think the other thing that is going to be big with 3D model generation is kind of what you were talking about with image to model generation stuff. I see that as possibly just kind of replacing a lot of modeling. If people can easily just take their phone, take a bunch of pictures or run some app and scan, walk around the object or whatever, and have it turn into something that's actually usable and good, and like, not 3 billion vertices and some crazy number of materials. But when the AI gets to the point that it can turn that into a usable game model or something close, I think it's going to change things drastically. And I think it's pretty close already. So
we're getting there.
All right,
we are definitely getting there.
I think it's going to change drastically, and I mean it's changed drastically already over the last 20 years. It's just going to keep at it. All right, let's go on to the next question from Anonymous. Got to put your name in there. Any tips on creating a consistent character animation frame? Say like a knight with a specific art style and look, or is that not possible? So say they want to have like a base character and then maybe it's animating to different poses, or doing some change there. Is there a way to keep it so that it's the same character, but now he's running and now he's standing, now he's happy, now he's angry, or different expressions or something like that?
Yeah, actually, there was, I mentioned it a little bit earlier. There's a package called ControlNet, and I haven't played with it yet, but it allows you to maintain and even generate specific poses throughout different generated images.
Oh, okay.
Now, that
So
is
you take a look
a plugin that is available for the stable Diffusion Web UI.
All right, and you said it's called ControlNet?
It is, yes. I'll provide
Nice.
links
Okay.
to that too.
Nice. Yeah, I just recently saw the Mid-Journey in painting feature too. It allows you to do something somewhat similar where you could like pick areas and then just regenerate that one specific area of it. And it seemed interesting. I haven't used it myself, though. I've just seen videos of them. I don't know how well edited the videos are.
Now, there are plugins that'll let you do all of that within Stable Diffusion. You
I
can
did
get
not,
everything
but
done that you can do with Midjourney and Dolly and everything else right on your local computer.
it seems pretty handy. I've got to get into this. I got to get. I mean, your video definitely made it seem much easier just following the steps. I am curious though. How much does that change, like from version to version or month to month? How much does that setup process go like, oh, you used to do this, now you do these other 3 things instead? Is that something that's like rapidly evolving, or is it relatively straightforward? Just install Python, install Node, and then set up the packages the same way. Has it been pretty stable, or is it in kind of a stable spot, or is there a spot to go learn how to do it when it changes next week, if it does?
Honestly, I installed it first on my computer last year, and nothing has changed. If it
Oh,
does,
perfect.
they should have it all available there within the repository and give you a step-by-step guide. I just followed the guide that they had on their GitHub to make this video. There aren't too many drastic changes, though. The only thing that differs from the video is when you're starting Stable Studio. When you do that, you don't have to boot up Yarn again. All you have to do is enter in that second command.
Oh, okay. Nice. Well, that's good to hear. I know sometimes I've had the experience in the past where like I'm working with something and then a month later it's totally different, and then a month later it's totally different, especially in the early like alpha and beta phases of stuff. So it's always a concern. All right, let's go on to the next question. They're just kind of flying in. It's a pretty hot topic. So Greg was asking, or no, this is Perry asking how the models are created. You can pop this one up. How are the models created? Can you talk a little bit about that? You're downloading them from Hugging Face, but what's the? I don't think you really dove too much into like the process of how models are actually generated and how you would maybe generate your own. I assume that's probably the main reason they're curious, because they want to, like, how do I
Right.
create and train my own model? Is that a difficult thing, or is that something that can follow similar steps?
Now that's a bit of a caveat there. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I'm on an AMD card, so I wouldn't be going over that in the video. And specifically for the reason, like I said, AMD's late to the game, so we can't really train models on Windows yet. I'm not sure about the Linux version. I haven't dual booted to test it. It's not necessarily difficult. However, it takes between 15 to 20 images of your subject with tags once you're done. However, it's recommended that you use anywhere between 200 to 1500 just to get a solid model base.
Oh, okay. So you give it those images and then I assume run some command that does the training, and you don't have to be like a AI wizard that understands what all the nodes mean and tie a bunch of stuff together or anything, right? You're
Oh,
just
not at all.
giving it the data,
You can
the
do
data
that
that's all
even
tagged up.
within the you can do that even within the Stable Diffusion web UI. There's a train tab, and if your graphics card will support it, most NVIDIA cards do. There's a bonus for you NVIDIA users. You can point it to a directory full of images, give it some basic information, and let it train.
Awesome.
And in the end, you'll have a fully generated model.
Sounds super simple. I'm going to have to give that a try myself. It's one of the things I've been waiting for this conference to do, figure out how to train an image model and actually use it. All right, let's go on to Abdullah's question. This is going to be an interesting one. Well, it could be. It depends really what your opinion is. But what are your thoughts on copyright infringement and AI? Will your technology block recreating trademarked material even if your data set is clean and it doesn't contain any infringed material? Now, I don't know how it could. I mean, I feel like it always could recreate trademarked material accidentally, right? Just like some random kid could draw a Coke can and put the word Coke there accidentally, never seeing a Coke can before. Probably unlikely, but could happen. Or maybe Mickey Mouse, or something a little more abstract, right? That's not just a word. I could see those things getting done, or somebody making up their own Pac-Man and Ghost not knowing that they'd never actually played the game or seen it.
Now, I
So, yeah,
honestly
thoughts?
have a lot of thoughts on copyright infringement and AI. And honestly, so do the courts and several hundred thousands of lawyers. And that's why we're kind of waiting for the courts to make a judgment. The one thing we do know is that copyright infringement at any level is against the law, which is why, primarily, one of the reasons why I made this video. And even though I can't train my own models, when I do get an NVIDIA card or rent one, I'll be able to. And the beautiful thing about it, if your data set doesn't contain infringing material, as you guys saw in the video, I tried to make an itty bitty kitty cat in a field of flowers. I got it back in a hand. It doesn't know what flowers are. It can't make flowers.
Yep. Not in the data set, right?
If it's not there, it has no idea. You may as well be talking gibberish.
I said, where do you think the courts are going to land on this whole ethics thing?
I honestly have no idea. Ultimately, I think it's going to come down to you're going to have to use your own data or get permission for using the data that you're wanting to use, because copyright protections have existed for several hundreds of years, and that's not going to change.
I guess we'll see how it ends up soon. Court cases are going. I'm really curious to see what the end result is and how it all works and what happens with all these big companies. It's going to be definitely an interesting one. All right, let's take the next question. We're starting to run out of time. We've still got a bunch of questions. What is a good starting resource for the stable diffusion settings? Coming from Midjourney, I can't get anywhere near the same image quality. It's a good question, Casey. So in Midjourney, it's pretty easy. You just give it what you want, tell it the words, and you're done. But is there some like stuff that you can do in stable diffusion to kind of get to that point? Do you just need some plugins or some default settings to do something similar, or what's that process like to get the same good quality?
Now, when you see Midjourney, and this is a great question, when you see Midjourney announcing that they've got an update coming out, they're coming out with a newer trained model, first and foremost. One that has all new data added to it, all the cruddy stuff has been pruned, and it can generate those quality images that you're looking for. What they've done when they released the service to everybody is they let you choose the prompt, but they set the parameters according to their model, and each model is going to vary. Some of them you can get away with a baseline of a CFG scale, which is just how closely the AI follows the prompt. You can get that down to about a 7, 7.5. And for the sampling steps, keep that at about 25. And that works as a good baseline to test any model. But you're going to find that your results really do rely on your model.
Okay, and is there like a Midjourney like just general model that they would use for stable diffusion, or a couple of them, or something that's kind of like the default to get some good quality stuff that's not, only in one specific art style?
Yeah, there's a plethora of them out there, and that's why I mentioned HuggingFace.co and Civitai in my video, because those are the two primary resources from where to find them. Now, I will mention again that Civitai does have an NSFW filter. Keep it on.
Well, Hugging Face has some ridiculous number of models on there, though, right?
It does,
Aren't
and
there
it's also got
aren't there like
models for
hundreds of
a
thousands?
plethora of purposes. There are,
Okay.
and they've got
Is
it for
is there a
text to
default one you
image,
would
text to
recommend?
speech. Honestly, the Stable Diffusion 2.1 model works really well from Hugging Face. I tend to
Okay.
stick to Civitai because that's more community produced than Hugging Face, which tends to kind of attract the academics.
Oh, okay. All right.
On
Well,
there,
let's
they've
go
got
on. We got.
models like Colorful and Animatrix. They look okay.
Yeah, I need to dig into these and start experimenting. I feel like it'd be a good way to also get a whole bunch of stuff that kind of fits better into one style like I want, which I think is important for doing game development. I feel like with it seems to me, at least from what I understand, with the Stable Diffusion setup, I can have a lot more control, kind of lock down a style and then generate all of the stuff matching that style so that it's not so disparate on the different looks of all the things that I've generated and created, like I kind of get with Midjourney. Oh yeah, I'm excited for
Right.
that. Let's take a couple more of these questions. I want to see if we can knock out. We got 5 left to see if we can get through all of them. It says, is there a good model for fine tuning on branding, logos, or banners, etc.? So they want to do. You showed one on crosshairs. Is there something similar for banners or logos that you would recommend or that you've used or seen yet?
I honestly haven't looked. I'm afraid of that
Okay.
copyright infringement slap just as much as anyone else.
That's hilarious. I actually saw a really good example of some AI logo and banner generation yesterday on Matt Wolf's channel. It's on YouTube. He talks about AI stuff nonstop now, and one of the things he showed yesterday was something that did exactly that. I don't know if it was to a stable diffusion though. I think it was like a whole separate service that somebody had set up on top of it.
Now that you've reminded me, this week I have seen a new service out for AI generation, and that does typography really, really well. But I can't remember the name right now. I'll fish up the link.
All right, yeah, join in the expo hall and come ask. We'll try to drop them down in the resources as well. All right, let's go on to Think's question. Who's wondering about Maple stuff? Is what equivalents are available for Apple Silicon, M1, M2 chips, Macs, iPads, iPhones, etc.? Or can all these be run on Apple Silicon already since they have multiple GPU in their neural cores and Mac OSs? Does it work on a Mac? Does any of this stuff work on a Mac? Are there specific versions of things that you have to run on a Mac, or specific types of Macs that you have to have? Or is it just like way better on a Mac because Apple made their new AI chip?
Now, generally, I like to eat my fruit and not play with it, so I didn't have answers before the video started. But it does turn out that this will run on Apple Silicon, and there is a link in the automatic 1111 Stable Diffusion Web UI repo. Man, that is a lot of words for the Apple Silicon instructions. And there is something that I saw questions about earlier called Diffusion B. And just to quickly touch on that because it disappeared, I hadn't heard of it, and it looks kind of like a Mid-Journey service where you can install it to your Mac, but do it locally. In that it's already got its own model attached, so you're pretty much limited to what it gives you. I can't say much more than that because I didn't find much more.
It might be the good one to install on your mom's computer that wants to generate stuff, and you don't want to have to support it afterwards. You're giving me some ideas. All right, let's go on to the next one. We got 3 questions left. I think we're going to make it through. I've seen a Unity package in one of your videos where you created a chest or something like that. Polyhive, I think, but that was 3D, right? Do you know what this is?
The only chests that we have were created by my guy over in Germany, Manu. And
it could have been one of the videos that I did where there was some generation stuff, but it was slightly different. I don't know. Let's go on to the next one.
Okay.
So this one was less of a question and I think more of just a mention of about the new iPhone. So I was talking earlier about how I think that scanning objects is probably going to be one of the stronger things that AI will actually do. I think you'll scan it and the AI is going to have a big part in making that into an actual usable object. And they're saying that on the newer iPhones, you can do 3D scanning of any object and use Reality Kit to make an OBJ file and pull them into Unity and Unreal, which I knew you could already do that. But I'm curious, like, do you think that this new AI tech is going to make that just drastically better and make it so that those objects are actually like good and usable? Or do you think that that's still quite a ways off?
Well, I mean, honestly, I don't necessarily think we need any of this newer AI to tackle that anyway. It's simply cutting it out and making sure that the mesh is optimized before we slap on our scans. But I do
you don't think that I was saying, you
Go
don't
ahead.
think that the AI stuff is going to make that drastically easier? I honestly have no idea. So that's why I'm curious. Like, is this going to just make that stuff drastically easier, or is it going to be maybe no impact? Okay, that's fair. I have
That's
no
probably
idea
about a
myself.
50-50. Yet to be seen.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Well, this was great. I wanted to say thank you again and make sure that everybody goes and checks out all of the Shattered Souls assets. I use the icon one all the time now. Like my new like go-to default for making images and stuff. Like, oh, go grab my icon studio, pop it in, and I'm constantly making different icons now. If I'm not making abstract ones in Midjourney, at least, which will now be Stable Diffusion going forward.
There are
ahead.
models for game icons too.
That's
There are
something I
plenty
need
of
to dig
models.
into. Yeah,
I'll provide a
that's one of
bunch
the
of
things I
links
struggle
in
with on
also
Midjourney a lot is getting good icons and good game UI art stuff. So I think that I'm gonna dig into this stuff. Probably not today. It'll probably be tomorrow. But tomorrow I'm gonna spend a lot of time trying to figure out what I can do with Stable Diffusion. I've got a project where I need a lot of UI art so that I can give it out to people. So I can't just use asset packs, and I think that that'll help a lot. So thanks again. I assume you're going to be hanging out in the expo hall for a little while. People have some more follow-up questions.
Absolutely. I'm running over there now.
All right, great. Well, we will see you all in the expo hall. Please rate Etonics Talk. Go give it all your smiley faces. If you haven't already signed up for the Unity beta, make sure that you do that as well. There's a link in there's a link on every one of the pages where the stream is showing. So you can go join that now, sign up for the beta, get in there so you know what everybody's talking about when they're talking about it. And we will be back in about 10 minutes with our third session of the day on, the music started playing perfectly, Gregory's talk on AI-generated music for games. So come back for that. It'll be the last talk that we're going to stream live on YouTube. After that, you just have to go to the GameDev Guild page, sign in, and you can still watch the rest of it for free, and you can ask questions right on there. So we'll see you all in 10 minutes. Thank you again, Etonics. This was awesome. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to come drop by the booth in a few minutes and say hello. All right, welcome back to the third hour of Game Dev Guild's AI Game Dev Day. We got an exciting talk here from Gregory on AI-generated music for games. It's coming up in just a minute, but before we get to that, I did want to really quickly thank our sponsor, Unity, and make sure that everybody goes to sign up for the Unity AI beta. If you haven't done that yet, you're missing out. You want to get in there, get in early on the list so that you can try out all the new beta stuff as early as possible and know what everybody's talking about when they start talking about and using all of these awesome tools. All right, we've got 5 more sessions coming up today. Gregory's next, followed by a lunch break where we'll take some time to hang out in the expo hall, talk to everybody, give everybody who hasn't registered yet a chance to go grab their free pass and come join us for the second half of the show. The second or did I guess so? We got 7. I'm not going to do the math right now. Somebody watching can figure out the exact percentage there. But we've got Corvallis after that talking about AI NPCs. Mohammed's going to be doing a session on Open AI is my dungeon master. And then we've got a live session with Mark Witten. We're going to be talking about what's going on with AI at Unity. I think that's going to be probably the most exciting and new information filled part of the entire event. And then we're going to end it with something nice and strong, which is my buddy Chris Lucian, who's going to be talking about harnessing the power of AI in game development, going over all of the different stuff that he's using to make game development easier and better with AI. But first, we've got Gregory, who's going to be talking about music for games, which I'm really excited about because making music is definitely a weak point of mine, kind of like art, and being able to do that with AI, make something that perfectly fits into my game and not have it cost me a ridiculous amount of money sounds really exciting. So I'm excited to check out this talk. If you've got questions, make sure that you submit them for Gregory before the Q&A or during the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them. So let's stop listening to me talk and let's listen to Gregory and some of his AI-generated music.
Hello, Game Dev Guild community. My name is Gregory Horvath, and I am super excited to be here on this AI day to talk to you about AI-generated music and sound effects and give you some fun examples of how I used it and how I got all this stuff working. So I hope you're eager to dive into this stuff with me. So I figured I would tell you a little bit more about myself here for a moment, just so you understand what brings me here today. I'm a technical product manager by trade in the software industry. I'm currently working on an open source AI product, and I also operate under the alias Game Shenanigans as an indie game developer, and you might be able to find me on itch.io game jamming around. You might occasionally see posts from me in Discord servers, and ultimately, I am just a tinkerer, and I love messing with things like AI or making small games. And I also work occasionally locally with Pan-Dimensional Studios, who is a small studio developing a 3D puzzle game at the moment. So, all in all, this brought me here today to talk to you about music generation and how I brought it into some of my tinkering and made a game out of it. So let's go over the scope of what I'd like to cover today. We're going to cover 2 models, Facebook music generation model and Facebook audio generation model. And we'll go over those models, how they work, what sorts of inputs they accept, and how we're going to run them in a local experimentation environment that I set up. And we'll even dive into some prompt engineering, and we'll set up that prompt engineering with some of the underpinnings of the models and how they work. And then we'll bring it all together in a game jam where we actually show the model in use and, produce some sounds and music for a game. Now, I want to caution anybody that I do tend to get technical in these talks, and this one is no exception. We will be going to 11 in some places, but there will be some interesting results along the way that I think appeal to a variety of audiences. Now let's take a look at the model card for Music Gen first. As you can see, this model comes in 3 different sizes, a small, a medium, and a large. To differentiate those, the small has 300 million trainable parameters, the medium 1.5 billion, and the large 3.3 billion. The way we can think about the differences between these models is that you would want to use the small model for just testing things out, developing your APIs, making sure your inferencing is running, and experimenting quickly and efficiently. We'll use the medium model for generating our music for the actual game that we're developing, And the large model won't be featured here because that would run in a cloud instance somewhere, and we're not necessarily going to be using that. There's one bonus type of model here, which is the melody guided music generation model. And this takes both text and music to generate new music from that. So this would be if you had a track that you wanted to come up with a variation based on your text for. Now, we're not going to use that model here today, but it does produce interesting results. So before we dive in, let's just take a look at a couple of the limitations so that we already know what our boundary conditions are. This model here does not generate realistic vocals, so we're just not going to try for vocals. This model is only changed on English descriptions, which won't be a problem. Model will not perform equally well on music of all styles and cultures, so that means it's probably trained predominantly on Western music. The model sometimes will generate the end of songs collapsing into silence. We'll show that later on. And it can be difficult to assess what types of descriptions provide the best generation, so we'll might have to do some prompt engineering. So let's dive into the tech paper behind Music Gen so that we can understand a little better how this is going to work. And I promise we will try to stray as far as we can from anything resembling difficult math. In fact, we'll focus on the abstract here. So the two most important things to call out in the abstract, A, is that streams of compressed discrete music representation are tokens. And so if we are trying to figure out how our model is tokenizing, it is tokenizing on bits and pieces of music. So we have to figure out what the ratio of tokens to seconds is, and then parse that up so that we get the number of seconds of music generated that we want. Another thing to point out here is this is a single stage transformer language model. So they do a whole bunch of fancy stuff here that eliminates the need for us to have an additional stage for like upsampling the music that results to get higher quality samples. So there's a lot of good stuff here if you are not shy of reading tech papers, and it's very interesting how all the stuff works under the hood. But I think that is probably enough for us to get started. So as we journey into AI, it's important to know about Hugging Face. For those that maybe are unfamiliar, I decided to take a minute just to talk about Hugging Face, introduce you to what it has here. So Hugging Face is essentially the open source repo for most, if not all, open source AI models. Usually I've already kind of favorited the models we're using today, like Music Gen, Small, Medium, and Large, and Melody, and also the Audio Gen model. Through this, you can browse different models of different types and modalities. You can sometimes run the models directly in the browser using Hugging Face's systems. There's pricing if you decide you want to run faster or on specialized computing hardware. So there's a lot you can do with Hugging Face, and this is a great place to get started if you're new to the open source AI community. Maybe you want to test out developing applications using these models. There's different endpoints available for their APIs. So all in all, I would get started here if you haven't already. So one of the great things about Hugging Face is that some of the models you can actually run right on their website. As you can see here, you're running this on an A10G GPU, and I've already put in a prompt. So let's just generate some music and see what we get. That looks like it's going to take a little while, 97 seconds, and I'm in queue. So we'll come back in a minute. So all in, that took about a minute and a half to generate 15 seconds worth of audio. So this is probably going to be a time-consuming endeavor if we do all of our generation on Hugging Face's website. But let's see what we got. So to make it easier to rapidly experiment with Music Gen, what I decided to do was to create a server that could run either locally or in the cloud. And for most of these examples, I'm running it locally, as you'll see. And so to quickly go over the architecture, right? The goal is we can initiate a request from a Unity extension to some backend and get a response in the form of a WAV file that we can use that music in our game. And so the backend that I picked based on my experiences and knowledge of these tools was a Python backend with a UVcorn web server that exposes a fast API for making asynchronous calls to the actual model backend, which is running music gen, Medium in this case. All of that is running inside of a Docker container that is using all of the latest NVIDIA libraries, including CUDA libraries. So we'll see that in action here momentarily. Now let's take a look at the project. First of all, we have the auto request editor window. This file can be added to any Unity project, and it will give you an editor window that you can use to enter in prompts and query the asynchronous API to get your WAV file back. And you can see here, final deliverable is a WAV file that gets saved directly into your Unity project folder when you bring this in. Now let's talk about the Docker file. As you can see, we're using an image directly from NVIDIA that brings in all of the CUDA libraries and is running on the Ubuntu distribution of Linux. The image is going to add in all the Python dependencies and the UVcorn web server. And you'll see at the end, it's going to run the UVcorn web server on port 5000. Now, I wanted to call out here that we're using Poetry to manage our project dependencies for Python. And so within Poetry, you can see that we have our version of Python, our references to Fast API and UVcorn, the audio craft library provided directly from Facebook, a version of Torch and Torch Audio that uses a wheel built with NVIDIA's libraries, the Transformers library, which is a key component of any of these large language models, and a few other libraries. Now, our project itself is going to first pull in the model from Facebook Music Gen and pre-bake it into the image. So when this script is run from within the Docker image, it retrieves that model and stores it locally. So that way, when you kick off your query, you don't have to retrieve the model every time. So last but not least, we've got our API call for the generate function. Since we're using Fast API, it's really simple. We just add this one line here as a markup to indicate that our definition is going to be an API call. And then you can see that we create the method for generate, which accepts a prompt that is a string, tokens that is an integer, and temperature that is a float. And I've personally just decided to leave the temperature at 1 for all of these examples, because when I experimented with different values of temperature, I got some very erroneous results, like fading to silence or getting noise back. The tokens, that basically corresponds to the length. So 512 tokens is a fairly short clip and easy to run over and over and over again when you're testing, building this whole thing. And then later on, we turn it up to 1280 to increase the maximum length up to that 30 seconds mark that we're looking for. And so when all this is said and done, we'll have a generate function that we can call directly from within Unity. So I spun up the Docker backend. As you can see, it's running MusicGen Medium model. It's using our CUDA drivers. It's running locally on a 4090 GPU. And you can see a few prompts have already come in. Each one of these is probably generating somewhere around 30 seconds worth of music. And it's taking about 27 seconds on average to generate, which is pretty good. It's definitely fast enough to experiment with and see what we get, and not necessarily have to wait for longer queues on free cloud instances and things like that. Now, one of the great things about using Fast API is that you get a Swagger UI, which is what we're looking at here, that allows you to test your API in a browser. And so we wrote this little health check function into our API just to see if the server is running. Let's try it out. And we can see that it returned as status OK. So we know our server backend is running, and now let's start running queries against it from Unity. So taking a look at Facebook Music Gen Medium running locally, we're using a 4090, and you can see out of 24 gigs of available VRAM, it's using about 20 gigs. So if you didn't have 20 gigs of available VRAM for this to run, it would start using some sort of shared GPU memory with the system. It would probably go slower because you'd be using the PCI bus a lot more to move data back and forth to the GPU. Now, one option you have if you don't want to buy a GPU costing over $1,000 is to use GPU Cloud. And you can see here that a RTX 6000 instance is currently running about 50 cents per hour. And that would give you access to 24 gigabytes of VRAM, which is more than enough for Facebook's Music Gen Medium model. So all in, with a couple hours of inferencing, you might only be looking at a few dollars. So given this talk is about adding AI-generated music to a game jam game, the answer is yes, I do want to jam. And so I picked this game jam on itch.io, Do You Want to Jam? And I'm working on an entry for it that includes this AI-generated music that we're developing. The game jam theme is Freeze, so this should be a fun theme to come up with an interesting game based on. It's important to note that under the criteria, audio, including music and sound effects, is included. And if you're anything like me, always save the audio for the end because you don't actually have very many good ideas for it. And so hopefully this is where Music Gen will come in and save us. As we've seen in recent news, the use of AI-generated art and other media can be contentious in games. So let's double check the rules of this game jam to make sure we're permitted to use AI-generated music.
You can use any engine of your choice and any legally obtained asset. Regarding the use of AI, I don't have any rules for or against it, so definitely use your best judgment, especially when it comes to graphics and images.
So it doesn't seem like AI-generated music and sound effects will be a problem for this game jam, but just to be on the safe side, I also made sure when I submitted my game, I mentioned that I used AI generation to create these music and sound effects. So over the course of this talk, we've been kind of building up to prompt engineering with Music Gen. And, it helps to really understand the underpinnings of the models so that you actually can put in prompts that make sense. And now that we kind of understand how the model works, let's take a look at some of the prompts that the community have come up with. I found this repo on GitHub that basically gets us most of the way there. So if we scroll down, we can kind of take a look at this little block here. They nicely kind of point out that Music Gen responds well to musically inclined prompts. So they are specifying the time signature. They are specifying beats per minute, aka how fast it is. They're specifying kilobits per minute, aka the sound quality or sampling rate, and 48 kilohertz, which is the quality. And they're providing like kind of a genre, a feel of the music. So these are all things to work with. And just in my general experimentation, I found that it really doesn't help to give it prompts that don't seem to have any correspondence to music. Like Amazon Warrior Princess may not really produce anything all that interesting. And also discovered that, it really doesn't seem to help much to vary the temperature or most of these other parameters. So I'm leaving them out of this talk and focusing mostly on the prompts and the length of the generation. So I took some time to generate some music here. Already listened through all of it and split it up into some positive and negative cases of things I liked, things I didn't. What we're going for here was sort of a chill sci-fi sound. And so let's run through these. Now, if you're wondering what happened on that last track and why it was so quiet and then trailed off into silence, let's remember the music gen model card we talked about earlier and one of the limitations of the model. It says that the model sometimes can generate the end of songs collapsing into silence. And so this is one of the problems with stochastic models that have unpredictable results on some cases, and why we've kind of chosen not to generate music in real time, among other reasons, such as the computational power required to generate the music in real time. So let's take a look at the model card for audio gen. This model is actually version 2 of the model, trained between July and August 2023, so very recently as of this talk. The difference between version 1 and version 2 is it is trained on longer clips, it looks like, and this model is 1.5 billion parameters. It doesn't actually take very long to run inferencing because, for the most part, in our examples, we're going to be generating very short clips. Since sound generation was a little bit of a late add to this talk, I kind of took the lean approach and just made a Jupyter notebook and decided to throw everything at the model and see what stuck. So I found these one-word descriptions, and generating roughly 1 second worth of sound seemed to work pretty good, but I probably ran this dozens of times and just listened to tons of these 1 second clips to narrow it down to these like half a dozen good sounding clips. So let's see what we got here. Yeah, so we have some interesting sounds in there. I actually took it a step further and brought those into a sound editor and trimmed out some of the extra noise and then brought them into my project. So I didn't find that these clips were necessarily just ready to go right out of the gate. But considering that you just generated them with AI, it's kind of interesting. Let's check in on the progress that I've been making so far on my Game Jam game and see about adding some of those sound effects we generated to it. So when the stars spawn in this game, there's no sound effect, and it doesn't really give you that intensity of the sky is falling. So let's see if there's something we can do about that. So we added an AI-generated sound to the star so that when it spawns, it makes a ding. Let's see how that sounds. So a little bit annoying, but it definitely gives you that intensity rising feeling as the stars start to spawn and fall. Without audio, these portals here are a little bit dry too. To address this issue, we added an AI-generated warping sound to the portals. So, to close out this talk, we're going to play a few levels of my Game Jam submission and let you all determine if you feel like the AI-generated music and sound effects added a lot to the game.
All right. Thank you, Gregory. That was very cool. It reminded me of something that I had totally forgotten about. And there's even a question about it creating sound effects. I'd been thinking this whole time about the music creation side, but had totally forgotten that I also need sound effects, and getting sound effects by just typing what I want and having it generate me something seems like a much better solution. So this is very helpful. I've got a couple questions of my own, but we've got some in Slido. If you have questions for Gregory, drop them in now, and let's please bring them on in and start talking. All right, thank you very much for that. That was very cool, and like I said, it's super insightful because it reminded me of things that I should be doing and I'm not doing. And you also made it look really, really easy. And before we dive into other people's questions, because they are important, I do have one of my own that I want to make sure to ask. If I'm trying to come up with like a specific theme, like you said, using Amazon Warrior Princess music isn't probably going to get me what I want. But if I want Amazon Warrior Princess music, how do I say that in music terms? Or is there some way to like relate that? If I want like creepy horror thing, or I want like techno, some like outer space sci-fi theme, like how do I translate that into music words that make sense? Or is there some sort of like lookup or dictionary or something I can do or learn to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, that's probably what took me the most time to work through. So if you're trying to get something, some of the words you used actually would probably work very well, like sci-fi or horror, because you have to think that the data sets used to train these models are using descriptions people might attach to the music. So, those type of words do work well because they're like a theme or a style of music. But things that are like objects that maybe don't have like a musical intonation to them tend to be problematic. And I think with the emergence of AI generated music, we may start labeling music around things a little better. But I mean, that gets down to assigning like a musical concept to an object or person or whatever. So it's questionable. That would all be very subjective anyways. You can kind of use your imagination once you get into the prompts. You start finding your way towards the sounds you're looking for and the music you're looking for.
So yeah, I'm excited to try both, especially the sounds though. The music, like I said, I think it's interesting, and I want to have music, but I don't really want to spend too much time with it. Most of the time, I just play with it off. But sound effects are super important, and I need to make sure to create them on my. I think creating them on my own will make it a lot more interesting and exciting. Okay, trying to crawl around on my desk. All right, let's go into our first question from Weenie Walker Games. As someone who knows very little about music, how can AI help me pick out certain audio that goes well together for my specific game? I guess this is a question about somewhat on the audio generation side, and maybe there's other stuff that you can use to get better prompts or something along the way too. But what are your thoughts here on using AI to pick the right kind of music? That's something I'll probably struggle with myself too.
Absolutely. I think so picking the right kind of music for your game is ultimately going to be subjective. But once you start to like get an idea, like, am I going for a synthwave or techno feel, or maybe more classical? Like you kind of want to get into where your game's genre of music is going to be, and then the AI will emerge very well, right? Because I knew I wanted synthwave, so I went for it, right? And I gave it a whole bunch of prompts and ultimately got some results I was very happy with. But you just sort of listen to some music, get a feel for what you want, and then start working that into prompts. You don't need a ton of music theory, so it might seem intimidating, but you don't necessarily need to think about the 4/4 time too much, or the beats per minute. But if you have those, you might get even better results.
That's nice. It'd make it approachable for all of us, because I certainly don't have that. I remember my last music class was at a college in high school, and I don't remember a thing about it other than frozen yogurt down the street was really, really cheap. Like, I've lost all memory of those days. All right, we've got another question from Anonymous about banning AI. This is going to be a curious one when it comes to audio. I really have no idea what's going to happen. They're saying, do you have any thoughts on Steam's ban on games with generative AI assets? Does AI generated music fall into this category? And they say, I guess it depends on the music assets used for the training of the AI model. How does that kind of all, like, what do you think there? Do you think that music and audio is going to be a big thing? Is that already a big thing that with copyright and stuff? I know it is, like with YouTube videos, but in games, I don't know if I've ever heard of anybody using copyrighted stuff and getting sued or anything like that. Do you think it's going to be a problem with AI though?
Yeah, I think it's still being discussed. Facebook, if you read through their literature on the models, was very clear that they had licensing permissions to all of the assets they used, or Meta, depending on what the name of the company is of the day. So
Metabook.
they Metabook, yeah. So those models, they're very limited. You may not necessarily get a wide range of assets, but you certainly don't have as much to worry about because Facebook would eat it if they didn't license the music properly. I think where you start to run into more problems is if you're going to fine tune and use your own music. That said, Steam's ban, and I don't know that they fully banned it. I think they're just trying to clear off games that are almost all AI generated stuff. If you have a quality submission, I think you could probably still get it up on Steam. I'd have to look into that more.
Yeah, I don't know for sure, but my understanding was that they were banning things that were AI generated and looked like they would violate a copyright problem anyway, because they look so similar to some other copyrighted characters or things. But I could be wrong on that too. Maybe some of the other people later on have some more info on that. I'm sure people in the expo hall right now are chatting about it and know all about it. So let's go on to Corvallis's question, who's actually going to be speaking next after lunch. Said, you mentioned real-time game music was too computationally intensive, but could real-time sound effects be done?
Yeah, that's a really neat idea. I think that could be done. I was able to generate batches of sound effects in under a second. So, realistically, if you just wanted a sound effect and variations on it, it's possible. The only thing that I ran into with the sound effects is the signal to noise ratio isn't great. So I think as that model improves, you'll see better results, but it's still stochastic. So even if we get to the best possible model, you might still see 5 to 10% of the results are like questionable. But again, if you're just blowing through sound effects, maybe that's not a problem, right?
Yeah, maybe not, but it sounds like you probably want to be checking them, at least in the current state for now. And I mean, you're probably going to want to cache them anyway for performance. Ooh, it got dark in here. Let's go on to the next question from Anonymous. Will the project be available on GitHub or somewhere else? So the project that you've put here, is this publicly available for people to check out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I loaded it all into one GitHub repo, so you'll have like the AI backend and the Unity extension all available. And I'll drop a link to that in the Discord server so everybody can get access to it.
Nice. Yeah, we'll put that on wherever the resources end up being, which will probably be on this page too. All right. And the next question from Bob was about Docker. Says the Docker image to start up local environment seems super handy. Would you be able to share that, or is there a public repo we can access that? Is that part of this GitHub repo?
Yep, I loaded it all into the GitHub repo, and I went the route of Docker because it's so hard. When you get stuck in dependency hell, like trying to get everything to work out properly, you just want to like hermetically seal that and load it into an image.
Yeah, it makes it nice and simple, especially for sharing. And then Bob had another question. One more question, sorry. You mentioned at the beginning of the talk the ability to generate music and sound effects starting from audio tracks. Is it possible, for example, to make a music audio track more upbeat or chill via prompting? So could I give it like, my favorite song and tell it to make it into a calm song or into a horror scary song, and it'll keep that kind of same musical flow?
Yeah, it's really good at picking out the melody. So like a lot of their cherry picked example is like they take like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony or something, and they convert it to like a rock song. So if you want like variations on a track, it actually works pretty good at that. Part of the reason I didn't feature that in here is that it does tend to be more time consuming. Like I probably would have spent hours listening to music and trying to find the variation I was looking for. And I kind of, it just, I think that is an area that needs more work, because getting a variation, sometimes you just land so far in the next ballpark and you go through more tracks that way. But there is good stuff in there. On Meta's page, though, I can testify they cherry picked their results.
Yeah. Most places tend to. Not a surprise. All right. This next question was about sound effects. This is an interesting one. Is there any way to create sounds like we create images with prompts like Stable Diffusion and Midjourney? And if not, do you think that's something we'll be able to do soon? So things like, I picture like, can you type, a box being crushed or a sword hitting metal and get that sound effect back? Is that something that would just work in there, or how would you create something like that with this?
So the way I produced the sounds was I tried to think about what that sounded like in a way that the model gave me good results. So like I didn't just put in like the sound of going through a portal or something, because that didn't necessarily give me much. But I was able to get to the sound. So you have to be a little bit more thoughtful. I suspect though that, given time, these models will start to get to that point as people get more descriptive of the sound in their data sets.
Do you find it useful to be like much more descriptive about things, or is it better to just be less descriptive and play with the variables and knobs a little bit more?
For audio gen in particular, with the sound effects, less descriptive seemed to work better. If I gave it like a sentence, it would even sometimes play like clips that appeared in whatever clip they trained it on. So if it like was from a movie, you might hear the person like talking right before that sound occurred. So I got like various parts of whatever the underlying data set was when I gave it too much description. Music gen was the opposite experience. I found that if you didn't give it, if I just said synthwave, it would just be all over the spectrum. So I had to give it more detail to get it to where I wanted it to be.
Okay, yeah, tune that down. That's interesting. They're kind of opposites. All right, we've got two more questions. Let's pop them both up. Or the next one from Jay Wood. What other models would you suggest to check out for audio generation? So yeah, what can you just recap the ones you're already recommending, what they're called, so everybody gets looking and forgot already can go look it up. And then if there are any other ones that you would recommend, just spell those out now.
Yeah, so I personally focused on music gen for the music by Meta, and audio gen also by Meta for the audio. I didn't find a lot in the open source community that you could draw upon. Like Google had Google LM or whatever, but their model they didn't share, so I couldn't just load it on my computer. You'd have to go through a website or some other third party tool to use it. And this was common in this space. Stable diffusion, there's a million different models and like fine-tuned models that you can play with, but there wasn't as much in the music and audio space, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. But Meta seems to be kind of ruling that space right now.
For now, until they get conquered by somebody else.
Till the next one comes along. All right, let's go into this next question from Gideon. Is it possible to create AI music in the style of a particular artist? So can I make like just Tupac songs for everything, or does it work like that? Can I just pick an artist and it'll make things that kind of sound like what that artist generally sounds like, or can I go down even to like a specific album if I really love some specific album of some band?
Yeah, so this is where we've made, I think, Tony.
Whoops. I think
Sorry.
I think the wrong button. All good.
No worries, we're back.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
back. So
we're
yeah, music. Can I make everything Tupac style?
Yeah, so we had some comments about the gaps in the models, and this is where to focus on here. These models were trained on data that comes from data sets that don't include copyrighted music. So these are, think of like, if you think of stock photos or people just take generic photos of people like interacting with a computer or whatever, it's the same thing for music. They're using like stock music or stock sound effects or things that predate copyright laws, like, classical music. So the answer is no if you want Tupac. Maybe if you're okay with like some sort of classical music or whatever, but you'd be going by like composer or you'd be going by like a style of music. I, I would shy away from this anyway, just because of the copyright implications, but also, because the data sets have gaps around that copyrighted music.
That makes sense. I've seen that some artists are now getting in on that too. They're setting up to let AI generate songs for them and let people sell AI songs. Sounds like it's something that's probably going to happen anyway. So may as well take advantage of it while the rev share is really high on it before it drops down to like Spotify level, and then Spotify just takes everybody's voice and makes random songs or whatever they do. All right,
but they do license those. Yeah.
Oh,
The ones,
yeah, they just
the ones.
give you no money though.
Yep.
So let's see. We got time for one more question. Let's pop one more up. This is not. Oh, here we got to hit the button right here. There it goes. Could you use this to take a seed track and create variations like a combat and boss loop? So we talked about uploading or using the existing music in there as a basis. Could you do that and then just kind of create, like, say you've come up with and generated your one good song, or maybe your friend created and wrote your one good song. Can you then just put that in there and then generate enough variation to kind of fill out most of a game or the different loops and parts of the game that you need? Is that something that's kind of built in and easy to do in the tooling, or is that something you could just you could do it, you just have to do a bunch of work and hack around it?
I'm glad somebody said the word loop, because that is one of the challenges with Music Gen. You don't know which part of the song you're getting, and so it's really hard to make a loop out of it. However, the variations aspect of that question is actually a really good use case for the melody model. You can take something, if you had somebody actually write you a piece of music with a distinct melody and you wanted to, make it more intense for combat music or more subdued for menu music or wandering through a town. Great application for the melody model. You just have to kind of run through all the generations and cherry pick the ones that came out good, maybe clip them down so you can get a loop out of it. So it would require a little post editing, but it would be a good use case for it.
Okay. That's I think that's helpful. I don't know if I will be able to do anything with it unless it's automatic and it just says like, hey, hit a button and do it, because my audio skills are pretty terrible, but I can see it definitely being useful for people. It looks like I think there are two more questions I want to pop up. Let's pop up this one from Jim about real-time AI music being generated and then cached. I would assume that you think this might be feasible. How long does it take to generate the music? Is this something that could be done like in the loading scene and it just generates a new song each time and then that plays through? Or is that like a whole song take too long for that to be realistic right now?
Yeah, the only way to do this today would be to offload that to some sort of server in the cloud with more computational horsepower. I tried to allude to it in the talk, but when you reach the maximum amount of VRAM available to you and you get into that like shared memory, it just slows way down. You'll go from 30 seconds to generate a track to minutes for that. So just computationally speaking, probably not possible today, but these models get like quantized or reduced in size. That may become a possibility, but you still end up with a signal to noise ratio where you might get some like noise and stuff. And you don't want that at real time.
That makes sense. So yeah, it seems like it's maybe possible, probably not something you would want to do at this point in time. All right, let's pop up this last question that I don't really understand, but I'm going to read it anyway, and maybe you'll understand it because you know about audio. We got it? Is the question popping up? Oh,
Which
the
one? There's
question
3,
just
Jason.
disappeared. Oh, it just disappeared. It's the one that just disappeared. I just selected it and popped it to the top. I'll bring it back. There it is. Right there on top. It's about something. I honestly don't know what. Is it coming, Joe?
I may not know the answer to this either.
Well, I'll read it off. It says, at this stage, what differentiates this from what Foley artists do and what Skywalker sound do? I don't know what Foley artists do or what Skywalker sound is. So can you, does this make sense to you? Something you can answer and tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know specifically what those two things are, but I mean, I did research other tools for this. I just don't know if that's what this question is about. So,
okay. Well, we can skip it since I didn't know either. Maybe we'll chat about it a little bit in the expo hall and get a little bit more info. I'm terrible with audio stuff, so this is all kind of new.
too.
Anyway, I wanted to say thanks a lot, Greg. This is awesome and very helpful, and it's gave me a lot of inspiration, especially on the sound effects side. I really want to try making a bunch of little sound effects. I was thinking, like, how am I going to put sound effects and things into this game? I knew how to do audio, like voiceovers, sound I had never thought about. So I'm super excited to give this a try and kind of dive in and see what I can do with it. So thanks again. Everybody, please go rate Greg's session. Let us know what you thought. Let us know what you think about AI audio, and come join everybody in the expo hall during the lunch break. We're going to be offline for about 1 hour, give everybody time to go grab some food, hang out in the expo hall, chat with each other, and then get ready for Corvallis's session, which is coming up at, what is that? Technically 2 Eastern. So it's at 10 o'clock my time on the Pacific Coast. We're going to be talking about the anatomy of an AI, the anatomy of NPC AI. I get my words out there. It's going to be a pretty exciting talk to think about just using LLMs to control NPCs and probably a lot more. I expect to see a lot of interesting and different stuff there. So make sure that you're ready to come back for that. If you're watching on YouTube, go to the GameDevGuild.com site. I'll drop a link in chat. Come join us. You can grab a free pass and see everything, see the rest of the show, the next 5 sessions, and all the Q&As and everything else. Other than that, just special thanks to Unity, our sponsor for this event. Make sure that you go sign up for the Unity AI beta, get access to Muse and Centis as soon as possible. And speaking of, Gregory, I don't know if you've looked into Centis yet. I know it's all NDA'd and beta. They haven't talked much about it, but it does seem like that's possibly maybe where you would run something like, I don't know for sure, but where you would run like a music generation model like on device. I don't know if you can do that specifically with that, but my understanding is that Centis is for running all these models on device. So I would assume that that's probably like, I don't know. I'll have to see if we can ask about that, find out more. Anyway, thanks again, Gregory. Thank you, everyone.